Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Max Revenue channel. This is our weekly show called The Diary of a New Producer, where we give you a behind the curtain look into the life of Ian Cognito, a new producer who started now 13 weeks ago. He's trying to build a $1 million book of business, and I'm his mentor. My name is Micah. I'll be your host today. So let's get into this, folks. There's 5 things we're going to talk about in this week's Week 13's episode. If you've missed the previous episodes 1 through 12, go check them out. There's different nuance to every single video, right? Different lessons and tips that you can extract from each video. But this week we are talking about prospects who can't get out of their own way. The fact you can't judge a prospect by its cover. Confidence, talking about starting at the top, and then meeting numbers. So without further ado, here we go. Okay, getting out of your own way. And when I say getting out of your own way, I should say having a prospect get out of their own way. So talking with Ian, he had a meeting. It went really, really well. He went through our first meeting script, and essentially him and the buyer agreed. Quoting makes no sense. So check the mark. Okay, that's a win, right? It means he's explaining the game well, talking about the distribution process, and helping buyers realize that quoting doesn't make sense. But this is where a lot of buyers get stuck, and where you as a producer can get stuck, and where Ian got a little bit stuck. The buyer also was like, hey, how can I just hire you without really knowing anything, right? I don't want to quote, but I also just can't hire you just based on your word. And there's going to be some people that just can't make this jump, right? And when I say people, I mean prospects that can't just wrap their head around this idea. And they might take more time, right? Stay in touch with them. You might just have to cut bait and just say, okay, it is what it is. We agree to disagree. There's nothing you can do. You're stuck. But I think there's also people that you can bring over to your side and help them see the light, right? And some of the language that I use around this is, okay, if I'm talking to a prospect, it would go like, all right, Bob. So at this point, you're probably thinking that, quoting doesn't make sense, but what am I supposed to do? I don't want to just fire my guy. And how can I just trust someone based off of their word? Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Makes sense. Well, what we can do for you is, and what I've done to help people is due diligence, right? It gives you more tangible stuff to make a decision based upon. And our due diligence process, we're going to look at your rates and analyze those compared to the market. We're going to look at your coverages. And I'm also going to lay out a marketing strategy. If we were hired, this is what we'd execute for you for this upcoming renewal. And then you can talk about services, resources, all other stuff. But would that be something, if you had that information, would that be helpful? And again, if people are still having a hard time, guys, coming around to the idea of just firing and hiring you without actual firm numbers, that's okay at this first meeting. You don't have to overcome that at 100%. Just agree to get them to have them agree to take the next step, right? So if they come and say, okay, yeah, that sounds pretty interesting. Great. Just so you know, I'm not going to come back with numbers. And ultimately what we're going to do here is talk about the next steps, right? I'm going to come back with due diligence. A couple different things could happen. One is I might ask you to hire me, and you could still say no at that point. So there's no pressure. But 2 is I might could just confirm you're in a good spot. And the 3rd is maybe there is a scenario where it makes sense to have me market it or quote your insurance and not fire your current person, right? Maybe there's a market they don't have access to, or there's somewhere we have a really strong relationship that they don't. And then it makes sense to selectively go that route. So I think if you kind of give these people who are on the fence or just having a harder time grasping what you're trying to share with them, if you give them those 3 options, it makes them feel more comfortable taking that next step. But again, there's just some people, you got to cut the rope. It's kind of hopeless. All right, so next thing, you can't judge a book by its cover. We've all heard that quote. It's cliche, but you also can't judge a prospect by their cover, right? You can do all your research you want, but one of the coolest things is when you go into a meeting and you think they're going to be like a 10,000 revenue account and it's a 40, right? Or 100. Anyone who's been selling insurance has had this kind of happen to them. And so I just wanted to remind you today, as you're doing your research and prospecting, don't be so quick just to not call on certain people, especially if they're in your niche, where you're like, oh, that's a little small. Call them anyways. Don't be calling stuff is tiny, 1, 2 employees. But if you think it's kind of borderline, on the lower end, don't be afraid to call those lower end companies, because guess what? That's where You find those 3 stars that turn to 5 stars. I've talked about that a lot in terms of size and just the quality of person. But you also just find surprises. So Ian was making calls last week. He set a meeting with a company, with the CEO, which we'll talk about on my next point, starting at the top. But sets the meeting, he gets into the meeting, and he was telling me, he's like, man, this call, like literally, I thought it was like, 5 million in sales. Anyways, the company's doing 40 million in revenue, 300 employees, works all over the US. It's a good sized deal. And so it just totally threw him off, right? And it was a very pleasant surprise. So that's really cool. But this leads me to my next point, which is confidence. And Ian said something that was pretty cool. He was like, hey, I would have never 6 months ago had the confidence to call on an account like this, right? But now through following the process and working with you, I've been instilled with confidence, right? And I asked him, I said, hey, but let me ask you this. If you knew that this prospect was the size they were and he was the CEO, that's what we called, would you have been more scared or less? He's like, well, probably more. And so I was like, isn't it interesting how the mind works? Like you can think, like you assume that like, oh, it's a big company, it's the CEO, I gotta be worried, I gotta be scared. There's no reason to be scared, guys, of calling the CEO, CFO, the people at the top, even at these really good sized mid-market companies doing 30, 40, 50 million to 100 million in sales. And he said something interesting that I've noticed in my career as well. And that was the CEO is actually extremely friendly. He was very nice and he had to get there somehow, right? You don't just become CEO by being mean to people. So moral of the story is, don't be afraid to call bigger companies, right? I'm not saying all you got to call is bigger companies, but they're just very similar to smaller companies and actually sometimes a lot better to work with, right? And the people at the top, which is my next point, starting at the top, are usually very friendly, right? Even we just assume, oh, they're busy, they don't want to talk. But if you talk to them like a human and you speak with confidence, like at their level, you're going to have some success. All right, so which this is right to my next point number 4 that I wanted to hit with you guys today, and that's starting at the top. And I think we all know this. I'm not going to get into why that's makes sense to do. But one thing that came up is one of the challenges of starting at the top that I think you'll find really interesting. And I've noticed this, Ian felt this at this company. So the meeting ended and the guy was like, hey, I'm CEO. I'm obviously not really involved in handling the day-to-day on the insurance. I would make the ultimate change of brokers, give the blessing. But let me get with my team, see what their thoughts are, and then I'll get back to you. And so this is kind of interesting because we're always taught start at the top. I believe starting at the top. But I've seen this a lot where owners and CEOs don't want to necessarily overstep their, I guess you could say, subordinates, right? Or their management team. And this is a good leadership trait, right? You don't want to just fire off things to your team and have them do them, especially if you have other leaders in your company that are important and you want to send a message to them that you respect them. So don't get mad when a CEO does this. That's actually a really good trait. But as a seller of insurance, be aware of this, right? And so what I told to Ian, and I think is a really good tip that I'll take with me because talking with him helps me too, is to be prepared for this type of scenario and try to control it a little bit more next time. So when the meeting ended, and the CEO said, this sounds really interesting, tell me some more about yourself. What he should have tried to kind of close with is some language like this. When the CEO said, yeah, I'm not really in charge of this. He says, hey, I totally get, or I'm assuming, John, CEO, you're not in charge of the insurance, right? You probably have people that help you with the day-to-day. And you probably, before making any change or doing anything, would want to weigh in, or talk with them. Yeah. So what I can do to help facilitate the process, because I know you're busy, is just I can send them an email, copy you, kind of recap your and I's conversation, and just include what we would need to do the due diligence, and then kind of go from there. So this is what I told Ian. I think that if you can control that process a little bit, that can really help. Now, if the guy pushes back, no, I want to talk to him, I'll let you know if we're interested. Great. Now you maybe also know it's not as hot of an opportunity as you maybe thought it was, or maybe the CEO's not quite as interested as you thought they were. But this is so frustrating for us agents. Like, go to the owner, you think you got him, he's interested, and he's like, oh, I gotta check with my HR person first. And you're like, what? But it happens, right? If you're in the mid-market space, it happens. Don't get angry. It's not a bad trait of the buyer. That's a very good trait. But try to control it a little bit more and make it easy for the owner to introduce you and almost assume that they're taking the next step of doing the due diligence instead of asking if they want to take it to their subordinate, whoever that is. And then the last thing I want to talk about today is just meeting numbers real quickly with you guys. And my message is simple. You know, Ian's week 13 now. Don't get discouraged over your meeting numbers. If you're getting one meeting a week, I think that's really solid, especially if they're with good prospects, right? Now, what's going to happen though, you start to get more meetings or kind of a cluster of meetings, because what will happen is, remember, the cold calls you're making today will turn into warm calls tomorrow. But it takes time for those follow-up laters and those warm calls to start to pop back up on your CRM system. And I start to see that happening anywhere from month 6 to maybe even a year, but somewhere in that time frame, you're going to start to get callbacks, or you're going to have people pop up and, oh, I can call this person back. You know, you've talked to them in the past. And so then your meeting numbers should start to go up with that, right? So that's all I wanted to say to you, is don't get discouraged about that. So, hey, hope you enjoyed this week's episode. If you did, do us a huge favor at the show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel. Let's get the word out to more people. Like this video, comment on this video, follow us on LinkedIn, subscribe to our newsletter. And last but not least, if you have not bought the Producer Playbook, go check it out. It's like $195. It's helps producers go from scratch to $1 million book step by step. Talks to through a lot of these different things. And I think you'll get a ton of value out of it. So, hey, enjoy it. Take care.